As promised, we've got some American perspective now. I'm joined by U.S. Democratic Representative for California, Bera. Congressman, thank you for waiting. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me on. It was pretty chilling hearing the premier, though, talk about what Trump's agenda is.
Well, let's start there. I mean, that's the premier's view. The prime minister said today, after word of it got out that he'd said it in public, but to say it on national television, international television, that you think this is really about weakening us to the point of annexation. I mean, how do you view that as a Californian, sir?
Yeah, that's not my goal. I don't think that's most of my colleagues' goal in Congress. Certainly on the Democratic side, we do need our Republican members, our colleagues, to step up and say, hey, wait a minute. A trade war with Canada, our closest trading partners, Mexico, is going to cause pain on both sides of the border unnecessarily. USMCA actually has been working. There's places where we could make it better for everyone. That negotiation's coming up in 2026. There's no need to do this. But again, I'm not a psychiatrist either. I'm a doctor, but this is what President Trump has said, and I would take him at face value. This is what he's doing.
He has also said it's about fentanyl, and I am not trying in any way to minimize the public health scores that fentanyl has caused in your country and in our country. The deaths are catastrophic, and it needs to be dealt with. But less than 1% of the seizures in your country were at the Canada-U.S. border, and in the month since this has been a real urgent focus, those have been reduced by 97%. It's like less than an ounce, a fraction of an ounce that's been seized. What do we do? Do Americans think that Canada is the source of their fentanyl problem? How do they view this?
I certainly don't. I don't think most Americans think about that. They certainly are concerned about the southern border, but we've also seen our friends in Mexico step up and start to address that, start to address some of the cartels. I think this is in Trump's mind. And again, how you change that, is this a negotiating ploy or something else? I'm not sure, but we ought to sit down with our friends in Canada, our friends in Mexico, our friends in Europe, and say, okay, fentanyl is a major problem. What can we do with our partners and allies to address the precursors, to address the demand side of it as well? It's not going to be easy to do this.
Right, but here we are. Canada and the United States, you could argue, Congressman, is the most successful economic partnership in modern history, if not global history, the history of the world. And we're in a trade war, at least at this hour. What are you expecting? I mean, California is a G7 economy in its own right, and Canada and Mexico are important markets and important import-export areas. What are you expecting economically over the next little while if this persists?
I think there's going to be pain on both sides of the border, right? I mean, I hear from my constituents that the cost of housing is way too high. Well, putting a tariff on lumber from Canada is not going to lower the cost of housing. Looking at immigration and deporting lots of folks that work in our construction industry is not going to lower the cost of housing. So this is going to cause pain on both sides of the border. It's going to hit the auto industry. Those auto workers in Michigan are going to feel it. Again, trade wars never end well. I mean, it is going to cause a lot of pain on both sides of the border.
Well, obviously, the big concern is that this is an attempt to force the auto sector in Canada to move to the United States, a repatriation of manufacturing. But you said off the top, you need Republicans to speak up. So if you start seeing auto factories in some of the swing states and some Republican districts, you see the price at the pump go up, utility bills go up, food prices go up. Is that going to motivate Republicans, or are they completely captured by Trump and his MAGA movement?
I certainly hope so. I mean, we lost auto workers in Michigan. They voted for Trump. I hope they show up at town halls. We hear those reports of Republican town halls and folks getting angry. Again, folks voted against Democrats because they were concerned about the price, the cost of eggs, the cost of cars, inflation. All of these trade moves that President Trump is doing are going to be inflationary, and they're going to backfire.
So what next, Congressman? We know that Canada has gone with a two-phase tariff response, at 25% on $30 billion of goods, and in another 21 days, another $125 billion after a consultation. So we don't do economic self-harm with this. And then look at the non-tariff measures. The Premier of Ontario musing about cutting off electricity exports to Minnesota and Michigan and New York. I mean, what are you watching for next in this? Do you think the president could reassure us all tonight in his speech?
Unfortunately, I think it's going to be in the opposite direction. Yeah. I think it'll be a combative, feisty speech that will leave us less reassured about what his next steps are. I think for myself and hopefully my colleagues that recognize Canada as an ally, we're going to have to travel up there. We're going to have to talk to the premiers directly. We're going to have to maintain the relationship. So whenever this fever breaks, that the relationship isn't so frayed that we can't rebuild it. And we can build a better trading relationship, but it is not through tariffs. It is through renegotiating USMCA, which has broadly been successful for all three partner countries.
I just as a final point, Congressman, I'm sure you're aware of what is happening globally because, you're a member of the U.S. Congress and here you are on a Canadian news show. But Canadians went from being shocked to kind of being angry to being afraid and now furious about a lot of these things. The Europeans are going through a very similar process. And the transatlantic alliance is looking at a future that doesn't rely on the United States because they don't know if they can trust the United States. They just don't see it as a reliable partner at this point in time. Do you think that's resonated with the American public in terms of how so many of the key historical, military, intelligence, and economic allies are reacting to this moment under this president?
Not yet, because I think a lot of the public that's paying attention certainly is in shock. Vladimir Zelensky is a hero. The Ukrainian people have shown courage. Vladimir Putin was the aggressor here. And to have a president of the United States recast that should be shocking to all of our public as it is to Europe and Canada. Now, the relationships are changing. It is good to see Europe stepping up to take more responsibility for European security. I think there's ways for the United States and Canada to work more closely together. This is not how to do it, though. I mean, these are important relationships. We're all democracies. We share very common values. Maybe it does mean the American public has to feel some pain. And so they could stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what we asked for.
Okay, just one last question. Howard Lutnick said tomorrow he thinks they might meet us in the middle on this. I have no idea what he means by that. I don't know what the middle is on 25%, 12.5% tariff, still pretty bad. How do you interpret those comments from the Commerce Secretary that there might be some sort of a compromise in 24 hours?
I have no idea what that means either. Hopefully it is folks in Kentucky saying, hey, we want to sell bourbon to Canada and we're going to feel the pain. I know American farmers are very concerned and very scared about what's happening. So again, until those folks are speaking up and their Republican representatives start to say enough's enough, it's going to be hard for us to fight them.
Well, Congressman, I'm a lifelong San Francisco 49ers fan. I'd like to go see a game guilt-free at some point, so hopefully this can get resolved. I want to thank you for being here. This is Ami Bera, U.S. Democratic Representative from California. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Be well.
The U.S. Senator from Vermont, Peter Welch, is standing by and is joining us now. So, Senator, hello. It's good to meet you, sir. I'm sorry we're getting acquainted in the middle of a trade war. I wonder what your reaction is to this economic battle that has been launched by your president.
Well, I'm really horrified by it and totally and completely opposed to it. We're from Vermont, and we love Canada. We like working with you. We have a library that's half in Canada and half in Vermont, and our relations with you are terrific. And by the way, the president is doing this under what he claims is national security. And I can see Canada from where I live, and I haven't seen any massing of troops, so I'm not that worried. So it's a bogus stretch on the part of the authority the president is claiming to do this. And it's really damaging. Here's the thing. It isn't our relationship. It creates a lot of tension. Vermonters, and most of us really all quite admire Canada and enjoy our relationship with you. But it's economically harmful to everyday people. Our electricity rates are going to go up. We get a lot of our electricity from Hydro-Quebec. We get a lot of our organic grain, and we get fertilizer from Canada. It's going to hurt our farmers. So this is going to be really tough on folks who are struggling at the end of the month to pay their bills. And I imagine the reciprocal situation will be true for Canadians as well. Okay,
Senator, you mentioned that library. This is the Haskell Free Library and Opera House. It is marks the border between the United States and Canada inside because the building actually straddles the border. There was a report in the Boston Globe in late February. Kristi Noem, who is the Secretary for Homeland Security, she was there and she would stand on the U.S. side of that border and say USA #1, and then cross over to the Canadian side and say the 51st state, and went back and forth doing this repeatedly, according to the library's executive director. The Prime Minister said today a remarkable thing to say about the United States, that he believes Donald Trump's motive is to weaken us economically so that the country can be annexed by the United States. When you see what Kristi Noem is doing and what Donald Trump is doing and what Justin Trudeau said today, how worried should Canada be that this is an economic warfare with territorial expansion at its core?
Well, it is economic warfare. I mean, this is very detrimental to your economy, and frankly, it's detrimental to our economy. I do not at all think that's Donald Trump talking about 51st state stuff. And if I were Canadian, I'd be really upset about that. And that incident with Kristi Noem is very disturbing to me. But the bottom line is we've got challenges here because the president is exceeding his authority. The Congress is in charge of tariffs, but we delegated decades ago emergency authority to a president. And that was with the expectation that it would be used with great restraint and for legitimate national security measures, not for just a negotiating tactic, particularly when there's real cooperation between Canada and the US on fentanyl and, of course, on our border. So there's a real challenge here in Congress because I believe that if we're going to maintain our authority as a separate and independent branch of government, then we cannot cede our power to the executive. And this is true whether it's Trump or any other president. And we have we've ceded our authority by basically acceding to Trump's use of this emergency authority to impose tariffs that have no legitimate basis and will be quite harmful to Vermont in the US as well as to Canada.
Well, Senator, the threat on congressional authority seems to go beyond just the use of tariffs under the emergency power on what most Canadians would say are flimsy pretenses. Elon Musk and his Doge organization is just going in and stopping spending that was appropriated by Congress, and given legislative authority to be spent in the way it was approved on. I mean, the concern you hear from Democrats that we've spoken with, because Republicans have not really weighed in on this, is that they're just going to go along with it. The Republican members of the House, members of the Senate, because things have largely been captured by the MAGA movement right now in that party. Is it your sense the Republicans will stand up here?
Unfortunately, I'm in agreement with you now, but with what happened, by the way, I do think the president has been on what I call a lawless rampage in the sense that he's exceeding his authority. You mentioned congressional authority about spending, and there has been a relinquishment of that on the part of my Republican colleagues, unfortunately. When you think back to when Nixon tried to do this, Republicans and Democrats objected, and we did because we wanted to maintain the jurisdictional authority of the House and Senate as an independent branch of government. Otherwise, there's not a check and balance. And of course, you're now seeing some of the Republican colleagues who have been staunch allies of our efforts to help Ukraine being silent, but I know it's a cause of real concern for them. And ultimately, we're going to need them because I think there's got to be some Republican pushback on some of these things that President Trump is doing to get us back in balance and also to restore some credibility for Congress as an independent branch of government.
Peter Welch, I wonder, Senator, what your thoughts are on just how the world is viewing America right now. Because look, you're in Vermont, so you're very close to the Canadian border. We send a lot of electricity flows into your state from Quebec. The Premier of Ontario is talking about cutting off electricity to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota if it comes to that. Canada and its European allies are having conversations about whether they can trust your country anymore as long as Donald Trump is president. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that and just how the world is changing now in just 6 weeks of this presidency.
Well, trust is the central word. We can have all of the laws and all of the treaties that give us formal authority and formal rights and responsibilities. But at the end of the day, trust is more important than anything. And that's true in our own democracy. We have a constitution, but we saw that challenged in January 6th with the attack on the Capitol. So I do fear this because I think the president's orientation is talking tough and being tough and backhanding your allies to get them to basically bend the knee to your wishes. It creates resentment. In the long term, I don't think it creates success. I think it really generates high likelihood of failure. And I think the better approach is really kind of the trusting relationship the US and Canada have had for generations. And that trust has allowed us to live with this border that we share, with commerce back and forth, and with the cultural and economic and social benefits of being a good neighbor. But that's trust. And once that trust erodes, it becomes hostility, and it gets a lot worse.
It's certainly badly damaged. And Senator, just as a final question, I don't know if anybody in Canada really wants to do it, but they feel they have to do it. The goal now is to come up with retaliation measures that inflict real pain on American businesses and American consumers, right? Driving up the price of gas, energy, food, products, everything, to hope the president will drop this. I mean, what do you think it will take? How much pain do you think needs to be inflicted on the American people and the American consumer before Donald Trump changes his mind?
Well, I don't know when he'll change his mind, but what I do know is that a lot of folks who voted for Trump did want to have us tighten up our government spending. They did want to see if we could make our agencies more efficient. And they did criticize legitimately, I think, the Democrats for our failures on the southern border, not the northern border. But I think what Trump is doing is so far away from delivering on those promises. What he's doing, he said nothing about housing and how much that's going to cost. By the way, with the tariffs, the lumber we get from Canada is going to make it more expensive. He's done nothing about affordability. And what he's done is had a bunch of billionaires who are now in his cabinet. And the central goal that he has is that tax cut that's heavily weighted towards billionaires and multinational corporations, but not affordability issues that are going to affect everyday Americans. And then even on this DOGE attack on government functions, it's a shoot first and aim later operation where they're sending out dismissal notices like to National Park Service people who have stellar performance reviews with a note saying, no, you're doing a lousy job and you're gone. He's fired veterans all over the government. So I think as the effects of this, people are going to ask themselves whether what he's selling is what they thought they were buying, because I don't think the two coincide at all.
Right, and anything we sell and buy now has a 25% tariff on it. Vermont Senator Peter Welch, it was really good to meet you, sir. Thank you for being here. We hope you'll come back in the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
As Canada fights back and braces for economic pain, some Americans are speaking out, saying the pain will be felt on both sides of the border.
Canada's always been family. It's been a cousin. It's been a good neighbor. And the way the President of the United States is treating Canada, it's wrong, it's despicable, and I'm speaking out against it. President Trump, stop the tariff on Canada.
I'm joined now by U.S. Democratic Representative for Minnesota, Betty McCollum. Congresswoman, welcome to the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me, David.
In this video you've posted, you had a direct appeal to Canadians saying there are members of Congress that are speaking out. I know there's Democratic members of Congress speaking out. Are there Republicans, and are there enough Republicans for Donald Trump to listen?
Well, we need the Republicans, especially from the Great Lakes states and the northern tier, to speak out about what is unfair and unjust with these tariffs being imposed on Canada. Our greatest trading partner, our greatest ally, and I consider Canada family.
Donald Trump considers it the potential 51st state, and the Prime Minister said today he feels this is all about weakening our economy to the point that he can pursue his annexation agenda. Do you believe that's what the President has in mind?
I have no idea what this president has in mind, because he's out of his mind to put these kind of tariffs on Canada. And, you know, I respect the sovereignty of Canada, and I think that the U.S. government should do that as well. And we should do everything in our power to make Canada a stronger partner in these struggles that we find our democracies under assault from.
You say you're going to need the Republicans. Do you think you're going to get them? Because they seem to have fallen very much in line with the president, even after what happened in the Oval Office on Friday with President Zelensky. They're not really speaking out on this stuff, preferring more to make light of it, make jokes, and just support him on anything he does. I mean, what's your sense of getting critical mass from the other side of the aisle here?
Well, they need to be serious about this because, as Mr. Trudeau pointed out, that, Trump started this. This is not only going to put, pain and suffering for Canadian families, it's also going to be for Minnesota families and families all across the United States. And I'll just give one example. Minnesota's a farm state, but we have farms all across our country. Over 80% of the fertilizer that we need to feed ourselves and to feed the world, which we should be doing through supporting and reinstituting U.S. aid, is from Canada. And so we exchange goods back and forth, and that's what's made this relationship so special. As an ally and as a partner, we should be supporting each other, and the president shouldn't be starting these unfair tariff wars that are going to hurt families on both sides of the border.
Well, instead, we're in this situation where it looks like we're going to be fighting each other with tariffs, counter-tariffs, and non-tariff measures as retaliation. The Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, said today that he's getting ready to put a 25% export tax on electricity. 1.5 million customers in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York get electricity from Ontario, so they're going to see their prices go up by 25%. And he says he's willing to shut the power off if that's what it takes. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope he doesn't shut the power off, because it's not the people of Minnesota and the other Great Lakes states that receive that power that are asking for this. So what we want to see happen is, and that's why I'm speaking out so strongly, I'm encouraging other members of Congress to speak out, to speak to the White House. This is just the wrong way to go about anything. The only thing I want to argue with Canadians about is maybe a hockey score and how many fish we can bring back. I mean, we are partners, we are allies, and for many of us, it is a family relationship. And for the president to being a bully towards any country, let alone a country that has stood with us at our times of need, and we support each other back and forth, it's just ludicrous, it's outrageous, and I am going to be calling on the Northern Tier Republicans to stand up and to tell President Trump this tariff is going to do harm to Minnesota families and families all across the United States. It's not going to help anybody. It's just putting a relationship that has been very strong, possibly on a hold from being able to move forward to even be stronger.
So Congresswoman, I just wonder, as a final question, what is your sense of the support for these tariffs among rank-and-file Americans? Because gas prices are going to go up, other things are going to start going up, housing's going to get more expensive. The knock-on effect of this makes little sense economically and on an affordability basis. What's your sense of how people support it today and how they might support it once the pain starts to move through the system?
So people in Minnesota were outraged when this first started coming up several weeks ago, and I have heard nothing but support for Canada and against the president for putting these tariffs forward. 100%. And when I was in my office today and I was telling some people from northern Minnesota who are not my constituents that I was going to be standing up for Canada, they all said without a moment's hesitation, we're with Canada. These tariffs need to stop. I have not had one constituent, one person from my constituency, as I said, in St. Paul, Minnesota, or from any place in Minnesota. I haven't heard anybody think this is a good idea. It's a terrible idea, and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. The bullying has to stop. We need all our friends and allies with us. We shouldn't be looking for wedges against us, so the president has to stop.
Congresswoman Betty McCollum from Minnesota, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked today if these tariffs are an act of war. He said the tariffs are designed to directly attack Canada's economic sovereignty.
Canadians are hurt. Canadians are angry. We're going to choose to not go on vacation in Florida or Old Orchard Beach or wherever. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your teams. We're not booing your players. We're buoying a policy that is designed to hurt us.
Well, as you just heard, many Americans are angry too, and they're worried. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has passed a resolution urging President Trump to reverse tariffs on Canada and Mexico. I'm joined now by the president of that mayor's group and the mayor of Columbus, Ohio, Andrew Ginther. Mayor Ginther, it's good to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, and thanks for having me.
Your organization has called for President Trump to repeal these tariffs. I mean, what's at stake here for your city and for your state?
Well, you think about it from a broader perspective, the United States and Canada has enjoyed such a strong partnership throughout the years. Just a couple of numbers. 8 million U.S. jobs are tied to trade with Canada. $2.5 billion worth of goods and services cross the Canada-U.S. border every day. Canada is the largest export market for the United States, and 70% of Canadian imports into the United States are used to manufacture other U.S. products. So when you think about it, we believe that the last thing consumers in Canada or the United States need right now are higher prices. And we believe that these tariffs are really tax increases, if you will. Mm-hmm. It tax on consumers. They'll make for more expensive homes, and housing is my number one priority as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and our number one issue here in Columbus. Higher transportation and energy costs and job losses. None of those things are in the interest of Americans or Canadians, and we think there's a better way.
So you know that, I know that. I'm sure the people around the president knows that. But here we are. I mean, your state alone is $21 billion worth of exports to Canada on an annual basis. If the economic data says this is a bad idea for everybody involved, do you really think this is about fentanyl? Because Canada has taken pretty big steps. Fentanyl seizures down 97% in a single month. I mean, what is Donald Trump doing here?
Well, I think that's why it's so critically important for us to keep talking about this and to telling the stories of consumers, of business owners, and the impact that a trade war, that these higher tariffs are going to plague, consumers in both countries, business people in both countries, the economies of both countries. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do. We passed an emergency resolution just last week at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Now, we supported President Trump back in 2020 when they put in place the Canadian, U.S., and Mexico Trade Pact. We were very supportive of that. And we think it's, trade is critically important to Ohio. It's critically important to places throughout the United States and to Canada and Mexico. There is a better way forward. We need business leaders, consumers, and other elected officials to speak out and push this message.
But a lot of elected officials in Washington in particular, sir, are lining up behind President Trump on this. Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno said today that the tariffs will cause some short-term pain, but it'll all be worth it to curb the flow of migrants and drugs along the border. I mean, what's your view of it? Are mayors worried about the Canada-U.S. border the way the president seems to be? And do you think there are enough Republicans out there to tell the president that maybe this is a bad idea?
No one is more interested in securing the border, slowing the flow of fentanyl, and continuing to reshore jobs than America's mayors. There's a better way to do it than a trade war and higher tariffs that are just going to increase prices for consumers more than they're already feeling, the effects of inflation, higher interest rates. The last thing we need to do is to make life more expensive for the hardworking men and women of the United States and of Canada. And we know, based on our history, we can accomplish and achieve so much more working together. We can secure our borders, we can slow the flow of fentanyl and reshore jobs in the United States and in Canada by working together, not through a trade war.
Well, right now, Canadian leaders at the provincial and national level are working together to find out ways to inflict pain on American consumers and American businesses, not because they don't like those people, but because they've been left with no choice. And I'm not sure how strong the trust levels are between the two countries right now, which, given the shared history, is a difficult thing to contemplate. Just as a final point, Mayor Ginther, what are your thoughts on that? Just whether the long-term relationship is a mess.
Yeah, and I think this is where, relying on mayors. I mentioned you, Mayor Gillingham from Winnipeg joining us at our U.S. Conference of Mayors leadership meeting. This is a place where I think mayors in both Canada and the United States need to continue to step up and say, this isn't about Republican, Democrat, left, right, conservative, moderate, liberal. This is about good business. This is how we grow our economies, protect our consumers. And for us, with these tariffs and prices, housing will become 10% more expensive than it already is in Central Ohio in the United States. And we know we have a supply crisis of anywhere to 4 to 6 million units here in our country, 200,000 in Columbus. That's not acceptable. And so I'm going to continue to work with folks like Mayor Gillingham, mayors in the United States, regardless of their political persuasion, and in Canada, to make sure we continue to tell the story and try to get the Canadian and the U.S. government to focus on people, to focus on growing businesses and creating jobs.
Mayor Andrew Ginther of Columbus, Ohio, we appreciate your time, sir. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.